Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a podcast from PJTN that focuses the light of truth on vital issues in today's headlines that impact every American. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza-Moore, founder and president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, and I'm here to educate, motivate, and activate you to action. I want to arm you with the truth and the facts you'll need to fight and preserve our constitutional republic and uphold the Judeo-Christian values our nation was founded upon. Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a PJTN podcast where we shine the light of biblical truth on vital issues from today's headlines that impact every American, Jew and Christian, people of faith and people of conscience. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza-Moore. On this week's podcast, I have invited Charles Ross to join us to talk about the rise of anti-Semitism in the Christian community. If you missed the last episode of this podcast, you will find it and our previous podcast lineup on our website at pjtn.org, as well as all the other platforms that you use to access your favorite podcasts. I also want to remind you to listen and share this and all of our previous podcasts with your family and friends so that they can become more informed about this and other related issues. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome to our podcast, Proclaiming Justice, Charles Ross. Charles, welcome.
Yes, I'm very happy to be here to show what can be done to stem anti-Semitism in the United States.
Charles, I found your article that you had shared with regards to what Mark Twain wrote about anti-Semitism within the Christian world back in his time. And I found it very intriguing what you had written about, because we are witnessing a rise of anti-Semitism in the United States of America, which is shocking because the United States of America, even back to the time of George Washington, has always regarded the Jews with great respect. And I want to share with our audience, I have a Bible. I collect old Bibles. And I have one that's dated back to the 1850s by the American Bible Society. It was published. And in the book of Romans, the chapter title in chapter 11 says, "Do not insult the Jews." And I thought this was really interesting considering the 2,000 years of anti-Semitism that we've had since the time of Christ. But the United States, as I mentioned, George Washington, when he was approached by the Torah Synagogue congregation in Newport, Rhode Island, and they wrote him a letter after the revolution asking him, how will the Jews fare as a result of this revolution? Because Jews typically, historically, do not fare well after revolutions. But George Washington decided to go and pay them a visit. And he went and he quoted from the book of Isaiah and told them that they too would sit under their own vine tree and they would know peace. And so even from our very inception, the Jews were to find themselves in a safe place in the new colonies in this country, in America, in the United States of America. But unfortunately, we have a past of anti-Semitism that literally is quite shameful, especially for Bible-believing Christians. But even to this day, it goes on. So, Charles, how did you get involved in this?
First of all, I was studying Mark Twain. And Mark Twain wrote an article in 1899. The article was called Concerning the Jew. It was in the Harper's Magazine. If people wanted to understand, they can look it up online. Harper Magazine, Mark Twain, Concerning the Jew. Mark Twain was in Germany at the time, and there was a speaker talking about the Jews at that time. The population of Germany was 45 million. in 1899. The population of the Jews was 500,000, which puts it at 1% of the population. It will show that 85% of the lawyers in Berlin were Jewish. And this person went on to explain how much the Jews control in Germany in 1899. And here we are again in the year 2022, and history is repeating itself.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it truly is. And it's really quite disturbing, especially because we're more biblically literate than we were, hundreds of years ago. And we have access to more historical documentation than we had. I love the article about Mark Twain, and I want to just highlight a couple of things in that article for our audience. And, one of the things that really concerned me was that, in Isaiah, and let me just start with this, Isaiah chapter 11, this is important for our audience because in Isaiah chapter 11, there is a prophecy by this prophet that talks about Ephraim not being jealous of Judah. And it starts in chapter 11 of Isaiah at verse 11. And it says that it shall be on that day, the Lord will once again show his hand to acquire the remnant of his people. This is the remnant of his people who remained from Assyria and from Egypt and from Pathros and from Cush and from Elam and from Shinar and from Hamath and from the islands of the sea. He will raise a banner for the nations and assemble the castaways of Israel, and he will gather in the dispersed ones of Judah from the four corners of the earth. Now listen to this, verse 13. The jealousy of Ephraim shall stop, and the oppressors of Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim will not be jealous of Judah or the Jews, and Judah will not harass Ephraim. They will fly in unison against the Philistine to the west, and together they will plunder the people of the east. Their hand will extend over Edom and Moab, and their discipline over the children of Ammon. Well, here's the article. This is what, and I believe Mark Twain knew this scripture well. He wrote a portion of this article. He said 9/10 of the hostility to the Jew come from the average Christian's inability to compete successfully with the average Jew in business or the questionable sort. In Berlin, a few years ago, I read a speech which frankly urged the expulsion of the Jews from Germany, and the agitator's speech was as frank as his proposition. Now, again, this is Mark Twain writing this. He goes on to say it was this, that 85% of the successful lawyers of Berlin were Jewish, and that about the same percentages of the great and lucrative businesses of all sort in Germany were in the hands of the Jewish race. He goes on to say, he mentions the numbers, the 48 million that you had mentioned, when only 500,000 of them were Jews. And he stated that the man claimed that in Berlin, this article that he's citing, the banks, the newspapers, the theaters, the great mercantile shipping, mining and manufacturing interest, the big army and city contracts, the tramways, and pretty much all the properties of high value and also the small businesses were in the hands of the Jews. He said the Jew was pushing the Christians to the wall, all along the line. It was all that a Christian could do to scrape together a living, and that the Jew must be banished, and there will be no other way of saving the Christians. Now, You note the crucial point of the mentioned agitation. The argument is that the Christians cannot compete with the Jew, and that hence his very bread is in peril. This is exactly what Hitler was promoting. If you go back and you listen to Hitler's speeches as they were translated into English, and you heard what he said about the Jews, he was blaming the Jews for all societal ills, the fact that Christians can't compete because the Jews are taking over. Charles, I was in an event last night, a political event, and I was quite shocked by a conversation I was having with a woman that was seated at my table. I didn't know her, had never met her before, but we got to talking about my organization, that I am running for a state house race in Tennessee. And I made a comment about our Jewish brethren and what the mission of the organization is to educate Christians to stand with Israel and the Jews. And she made a very anti-Semitic, derogatory comment. And, I'm sure she is a Christian. I don't know what church she is a member of, but we are seeing this happen again. Charles, what do you attribute it to, and how do we eliminate this? You mentioned that, you are trying to address and solve this problem of anti-Semitism in America again. How can we do that when we still have people who hold to these truths, over 70, 80 years ago were spoken in Germany and really quite literally in Europe? How do we confront this age-old hatred? It just never seems to go away.
What bothered me was that most of the Jewish organizations that deal with anti-Semitism, all they do is put out fires. If somebody does something, they go out and they complain, and they complain, and they complain, and they say, send me money so that I can complain more. And I looked at this and I said, they don't understand why Jews are so successful. And what I compared it to was, if you told Joe DiMaggio, the baseball player, that he could play baseball because he was so good, people would say, that's right. Yogi Berra, a baseball player, was good, so he could play baseball. Well, the Jews are intellectually smarter than the normal population. Now, if people would go on the internet, because it's a 38-page report by the University of Utah, did on the natural history of Ashkenazi Jewish intelligence. This started back in the year 1500, 1500. And came along a number of lipid diseases like Tay-Sachs and Gaucher and Niemann-Pick, which depilated the Jewish population because of lack of gene drift. Along with this came another lipid disease that was called DNA repairing. And for every generation after 1500, there was 1 point increase in intelligence in the Jewish community. For 20 future generations, which puts the average of the Jewish intelligence 10 to 16 points higher than the normal population. So what people are saying is, you can't use this intelligence to do anything because this will put you ahead of everybody. And we know that in Germany and all over the place, there were large restrictions on the Jewish population. And in the article of Mark Twain, he points this out, that the Jewish population restrictions were to even the playing field. Now, that was the second article that put me onto anti-Semitism. And excuse me, there was a third incident that put me onto anti-Semitism.
Mm-hmm. Well, Charles, it's very shocking, that we're still dealing with this issue. And of course, one of the biggest campaigns that we're involved in here at PJTN is education issues and the indoctrination and propaganda that we even see now infiltrating in the classrooms. And I am so grateful for the time that you have taken to speak with us about this issue. We have to remember, ladies and gentlemen, Genesis 12:3, God is very clear. I will bless those who bless you and curse him who curses you. And all the nations of the world shall bless themselves by you. And we can see that even in Mark Twain's article as he writes about the impact and the blessing that the Jewish people have been to each one of our lives, the advancements that have been made because of our Jewish brethren in science and technology and medicine. I mean, it is just, it's amazing. But even as I mentioned earlier in Isaiah 11, there is in the last days, as we all believe we are now in those last days, but in the last days, Ephraim and Judah will unite together. Most Christians do not know who Ephraim is. They think Ephraim was the grandson, which he was, of Jacob. He's the grandson, but they don't connect the dots to that blessing that Jacob gave to Ephraim, that he would grow into a multitude of fish in the midst of the sea. And you can read this in Genesis 48. Who are the fish, ladies and gentlemen? Isaiah spoke of us, and there's always been, for 2,000 years, there's been this jealousy and animosity against our Jewish brethren. And just like I still experience today, I've experienced, or last night at the event I was at, I've experienced it in the legislature in Tennessee, the anti-Semitic remarks made by legislators because of a lack of information, of biblical literacy when they should be more literate. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is such an important issue, and I want to thank Charles for joining us on our podcast to discuss this important issue. We need to pray for our Jewish brethren. We need to stand with them, to stand with Israel. The battle that Israel is fighting right now and the takeover of their government is very similar to the takeover of ours. What you saw happening to President Trump was exactly what was happening to Bibi Netanyahu. Why? Because these are the two statesmen of the world. They are the two that represent the Judeo-Christian values that America was founded upon. And so it's up to us, ladies and gentlemen, to share these biblical truths, share this show. So, ladies and gentlemen, Charles, I want to thank you for joining us on this show today. It's been a delight to meet you. I hope we can have you back on the program very soon. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to encourage you to go to our website to learn more about how to take back local control of your children's education. Ultimately, it starts with you. And this is one of the most important issues that we teach our children from the earliest of ages. If you are interested in hosting a summit in your community to help us educate, motivate, and activate your county, to flip your school board, Now is the time to do it. This is an election year, and now is the time to act. I hope you enjoyed this program. We will post this podcast on our website and all of our podcast platforms so that you can share with your family and friends. As PJTN Watchmen, we have a biblical mandate to stand against the ungodly rising Marxist threat that is destroying this nation and threatening our Judeo-Christian values. We cannot remain silent. God warned the prophet Ezekiel about the responsibility of the watchman, and the watchman has a duty to sound the alarm, to warn the inhabitants of the city when the enemy is advancing. And as a watchman, you can sound the alarm and warn others by simply sharing this podcast with your family and friends. Please share and like this podcast to help sound the alarm in your county. Dietrich Bonhoeffer reminded us, silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. In closing, don't forget to join us for next week's podcast as we continue this conversation about combating the rise of anti-Semitism and taking back local control of our communities and our children's education. I want to also remind you that if you have not signed up to become a PJTN Watchman, you can help support this effort and more programs like this for just $20 a month. With your generous donation, you can ensure that PJTN remains on the front lines and in the headlines, but we can't do it without your faithful prayers and financial support. I hope that you will prayerfully consider supporting our mission as we educate to activate Jews, Christians, and all people of conscience to stand on the front lines of this all-encompassing war. You can support this mission at pjtn.org. That's pjtn.org. I want to leave you with a sobering statement by Abraham Lincoln when he said, "The philosophy of the classroom in one generation will be the philosophy of the government in the next." God bless you, and thank you for all you do on behalf of our Jewish brethren, the State of Israel, and these United States. Thank you again for joining me on this edition of Proclaiming Justice. Please share this podcast with your family and friends. For more information about how you can get involved, please visit our website at pjtn.org. As a PJTN Watchman, you can help us keep up the fight to preserve our freedom for our children and their children for such a time as this.